All right, we've got Davidson College Coach James Janssen here on the podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the tagging up philosophy. I actually watched a coach's clinic of Coach Janssen. I guess it was, what was it? You said 2 years now, almost 2 years.
Last year. Yeah, last year.
Last year, kind of introducing the concept. I kind of heard of it a little bit, but didn't really know anything too in depth. And I thought he did a really good job. So I kind of asked him to come on and kind of just talk about it a little bit. So I appreciate you being here, Coach. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Where are you guys at in your season right now? This crazy year, obviously COVID. Kind of just give us like a rundown of how this season kind of went for you guys.
Yeah, so we actually just wrapped up our kind of spring session today. So our kids going to their exam break, but obviously for everyone, it was a pretty unique year in terms of everything around COVID and all those kind of things. We went into a season with a group. We had a big group of seniors, several that had kind of some long-term injuries coming into the year as well, and kind of had some high hopes on how we were looking at things. Obviously, the preparation, our situation at Davidson, we're bringing kids around the world, around the whole country, and so getting access to them early was pretty difficult. And we got rolling like everyone else. We actually played in the Gulf Coast Showcase down in Florida.
Oh, okay.
First week of the year, pretty tough. So we actually
opened
our season with.
Where'd you guys stay for that?
So that was actually it was at Florida Gulf Coast was where it got hosted this year.
Gotcha.
A little different, so kind of stayed down the resort there. So we had the enjoyment of opening our season with three games against Maryland, Wake Forest, and Florida Gulf Coast. So. Which was great. Had several injuries coming in, so we're missing a bunch of our better players.
Right.
Not the year we would have liked. We ended up for a good chunk of February having 7 healthy bodies. I think we only had one practice all year where we had 5 players able to go against 5.
Wow.
So I got a lot of scout team reps this year. All our coaches did.
You were suiting up, huh? Yeah.
So yeah, we had to lace them up a little bit.
Yeah.
So do that and. Yeah, ended up with kind of by the end of the year, basically our top 4 scorers didn't play the last kind of month of the season and that kind of thing. So not what we're looking for, but we're kind of excited for the group we have kind of coming in and who's coming back, and everyone's on the mend to being ready to go for next year. Yes. So definitely an interesting year.
How much did COVID affect you guys in terms of, did you guys get shut down quite a bit or?
So we're probably one of the very few teams in the country that didn't have a positive test.
One of the two. Us
too.
So
we took a lot of pride in that. Some of that was so the Davidson campus being pretty small. We're in the 2,000 students or so. We had the luxury that they actually tested. We had every student back pretty much, and they tested every single student on campus once a week.
Yeah.
So we were able to keep it off campus really well.
Right.
We only had a single shutdown from contact tracing from an opponent.
Oh, that is the worst, right?
Yeah, well, and I know you had Ryan Gensler on your podcast, so it was Dayton, but they got us.
Oh, so, come on, Ryan.
So that was their only so they beat it and they shut us down 2 weeks, double whammy. So that was our only shutdown. Our only issues all year, which was good. As I said, obviously lots of constraints around what your practices look like, and particularly early days when they got to campus, having individual workouts as the only option, and all those kind of things. But we actually got through pretty unscathed, which was awesome. I actually didn't have a single player apart from that game incident. We didn't have a single player even get caught up in contact tracing all year.
Wow.
So, which is pretty big time.
That is pretty big time. So I'm sure all the listeners can already hear the Australian accent. So let's get back to the roots a little bit. How did you get started in women's college basketball? Obviously coming to Davidson. Talk about, your kind of journey through coaching so far.
Yeah. So from Melbourne, Australia, I've been here, I guess, 9 years now. So it's a pretty dodgy Australian accent, I will say. Not a good one. But yeah, I could cop it from Australian players a lot about what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I was playing and coaching in Australia and kind of working in a university down there on the academic side. And at that point, it was a lot to juggle. And so I think it was 2012. decided I wanted to come over here for some further study and let the basketball stuff kind of take care of itself a little bit. I'm like, all right, I'm done playing. I was 26 at that point. I'm like, all right, I think it's time. Been playing in that league for 10 years. I'm like, all right, I think it's time for something different. And so I landed an academic scholarship to Wake Forest graduate program.
Okay.
Where I was studying. And so I was kind of the philosophy that like, all right, well, I'll let the basketball stuff kind of come to me as it happens, whether that be in a college setting or whether that be club basketball, high school basketball. Just I was like, all right, I need to get out of that situation. And it was a lot of fun there. I was just very busy and kind of working myself to almost bad health in a way. And so it was kind of convenient when I got accepted to Wake Forest. I got accepted in February 2012, and then there was a coaching turnover that April, May.
Okay.
So Jen Hoover took the job there as a head coach at Wake, and so I was pretty much the first email she got when she got that job. Hey, I'm coming to campus, free help. I'm going to be doing the graduate program. Obviously, be pretty busy. Happy to help however you want.
Right. Nice.
So I ended up helping them for 5 years. So the 2 years of graduate study, I was then kind of doing some research work down the road at UNCG and running a research study there, and kind of stayed with the basketball path with Wake, and so helped out there, and was fortunate enough that Gail Fultz was the assistant there. She got there the same time I did at Wake, and she got the Davidson job and was like, hey, do you want to do this thing for real? So while I was at Wake, I was obviously helping out in a variety of different ways, kind of volunteer coach type setup. And I was like, all right, you want to do this thing for real? So yeah, we got that position in, May of 2017 now. So we've been here 4 years and yeah, loving it.
Did you know right away, like once you started helping out with the Wake team, that that's kind of the route you wanted to go in terms of coaching?
Yeah, like it was kind of interesting. Like I've always wanted to, like my coaching in Australia, I'd let more to the girls' side towards my back end, and some of that it was funny. I was talking to an Australian coach about it a few weeks back. I was like, when did you go into the girls' stuff? And I was like, actually, like I kind of looked back and put it all together. It was Australia won the World Championships. I think it was 2007. I remember distinctly. I think it was in Brazil at the time. I think it was South America. Penny Taylor was the best player on the court that game. And I actually grew up in the same area that Penny Taylor was from. She coached me in a bunch of little clinics when I was a kid. And, and I was like, no, like this is awesome. This is really cool. And so that's kind of what got me into the kind of girls, women's side, and love that. And then when I was at Wake, like I was kind of on two paths. Like I really liked the basketball stuff, and I was kind of in the PhD route as well. So halfway through a PhD, when I kind of took the position at Davidson. So it was something I was like, obviously there's opportunity, but it's not that easy to obviously break in as someone that's taken a pretty non-traditional path. So once the opportunity made its way, then obviously I'm all in on this, and I'm doing this thing.
Nice. What have you found have been like the biggest differences in terms of the style of play, like just within the women's, I guess the men's and women's, I don't know if it's similar in your opinion, but right away, like you got to America, like besides what is it, the spacing, and give me some concepts really that you think that right away you noticed the huge differences within coming from Australia, coaching there, and in America.
Yeah, like obviously, like the first thing is the shot clock, right? Like that's got to be the first thing, and it probably was like it was really evident, obviously, like in ACC and just like that realm, and just like what does this style of play look like? But it probably became more pronounced to me when I got on the road recruiting and doing those kind of things and seeing what youth basketball really looks like, right?
There's like one literally there's no shot teams in Connecticut where no shot clock, none. I'm like, this is just painful. Like, just dribble the ball out for the last 3 minutes of the game. It's crazy.
Yeah, and so like I would say like the shot clock's the one thing. Obviously, just the style of play, what that looks like, is completely changed by that. And for context, like in Australia and Melbourne, where I'm from, probably has some of the best junior basketball in the world, I would say, in terms of their competition structure. And like you start with the shot clock, if you're among the better kids, you start with a shot clock there in under 14s. So when you're 12 years old, you're starting with a 24-second shot clock. And at that age group, it starts when you hit half court. Okay, so when you hit half court, it's It's the
Okay.
24 starts.
Gotcha.
Once you're under 16s on, you're playing with the 24 like for the rest of your life.
You're just
Like that's what it looks like. And so obviously that changes like a lot of kind of what the game looks like.
Mhm.
The spacing elements are helped by the longer 3-point line, the wider lane. Like those are structural things about the basketball court that change the style of play. When I first got here, obviously we were playing halves, and like the women's game's done an awesome job moving to quarters and that kind of thing. Like that, I think that's really kind of changed the game for better. And then obviously like just the ball movement in the international context is just so different. Like we watched a bunch of the games on the live streams the other day. It was kind of funny because the previous week was actually the under 18 Australian national championships.
Mm-hmm.
And so watching some of that, and like you wouldn't even think those were the same sports. What we were watching like the last kind of 2 weeks. So I think that those are some things. And then kind of stylistically, I think that the one thing is like, and it probably goes for most international basketball, like just with the constraints of the shot clock and the coaching and some of those kind of things, like the game looks very similar with everyone. Yep. Whereas I think the difference here within the college structure especially is there's so much variety in what the basketball looks like from game to game. And like that's something we talk about all the time in the Atlantic 10 conference is like there's just so much variety from week to week. And this year we actually played the travel partner setup. Mm-hmm. And like you play one team on a so you might play a team on the Friday night, which was let's say you play LaSalle. So you got Mountain that came there. He's running a 5-out motion.
He was, I don't know, he was my coach. Yep.
Yeah. So like they're running like a 5-out motion basically. They're shooting everything really quick. Yep. They're doing this and that. They're playing some funky defenses. They're doing it, playing pretty quick. Like that's how they played this year. And then the next day,
the buzz down, right?
Well, he's got the buzz. Yeah, he didn't use it that as much this year, I don't think. But
we used it a ton. Tap your head.
So you got that. Then the Sunday, you're coming out and you're playing St. Joe's, and they play like among the 5 slowest teams in the entire country. They do what they do, and it's just completely different. Like I think that's one thing that's really quite challenging as a coach in this context is just over there, okay, well, we got to be good at these things. We got to be great in ball screen. We got to be great in these things. Gotcha. Like there's so much within the college context here because of the variety stylistically. But it's very unique, I think.
Right. So would you say that scouting reports then are just way more, like emphasized here because of the different styles of play, or like compared to, back in Australia?
I would say you probably, and then even like the professional level down in Australia. So I'm familiar with a few of the WNBL clubs do, and I would say they probably put more emphasis on individual tendencies, in that context, and kind of obviously, they'll go through a few sets or whatever that looks like. But here, you probably have to put a little more emphasis on like, hey, this is like literally a completely different system of basketball. What they're doing.
That's the struggle. I definitely for me this year, like in my first year, obviously adjusting. So we played back-to-back games. So we would play Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday. So, it'd be home or away, whatever it was. Yeah. So that was really interesting. And I think it was obviously harder on the players just physically, but it was actually kind of nice because you were only prepping for one team a week.
Yeah.
So obviously, the night of the game though, right? So if we played at 7 p.m. and then played at 7 p.m. the next night, like, you're up like clipping that game and getting film ready for the next morning. You don't have a couple of days in between. So that was interesting. And it was kind of like a battle of coaching adjustments too, right? Like how many changes can you make in 24 hours, or do you even want to make, right? Because that's a really short turnaround time. So that was really interesting for my first year, at least doing it that way.
Yeah, I was interested. Like there are obviously a few leagues that did it that way. We weren't one of them, but like observing the leagues that did it that way, it was kind of shocking how often you'd have like a blowout one direction on Friday, blowout the other direction Saturday. Like it's like
we definitely felt that. Yeah, we'd play great one night and be, we don't need to change much for the next, right? We're good. But then, the next day,
all right, well,
completely different. So that was interesting. But All right, shifting into our main topic, obviously, of the tagging up philosophy, was that something that you kind of, implemented into your coaching back in Australia, or was it something you kind of discovered here? Can you just give a little insight into how you kind of came about it? Was it a staff decision at Davidson, or was it something that you kind of always believed in before we even get into what it is?
Yeah, so really, it wasn't something that was that common when I was back in Australia. I'd become familiar over the previous few years of like some teams adopting it a little bit more. In the junior structure in Australia, there were a couple of the youth national teams that went that route. But really, like what we kind of did a bit of a debrief each year that we've been here after the season of what we felt we did well, what we felt we didn't do well, and what we just found really challenging as coaches. And after that second year, we actually had a really successful year where we'd kind of been picked 11th in the conference, and I think we finished 4th at the end of the year, which was pretty big growth from a team kind of where they were at. And we're like, but the one thing that like when we're talking about scouting, we're talking about this and that, like we just had a lot of trouble and confusion with defensive transition. And like we just the kids didn't really, and we were like, we're obviously not coaching this real well. So it's a really tough phase of the game. Like let's like critically think about how we can do this differently. And a lot of the stuff we do is designed to kind of allow freedom for our players, kind of not minimize the choices, but kind of constrain the ideas of what they need to do, which allows them to make quicker choices, and just a little bit more kind of black and white to some things. Obviously, there's a lot of gray in basketball, right? There's lots of areas that's gray that you can't change, but if there's some areas where you can remove some of that gray, that's helpful.
Right.
And so I remembered kind of hearing some stuff from Aaron Fern, who kind of came up with the system the previous year and had a lot of interest in it. And it kind of made intuitive sense to me. Spoken to some of my friend coaches that had kind of adopted it previously, and they'd really enjoyed it. And so we talked about it as a staff. We had a bunch of conversations with those people about how they went about it, what it looked like, all those kind of things. We weren't aware of anyone in women's college basketball that had done it. And so we're like, all right, well, let's give it a shot.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, that's how we got to it.
So the ultimate goal of it was just to improve initially, right? Your defensive transition. That's really what why you guys chose to go with it. So can you get into a little bit, obviously just talk to us about it. What kind of is the philosophy? How does it work? And then we'll dive into the nitty gritty of the details.
Yeah. So basically like I kind of call it a system of ending offense and starting defense.
I like that. I like the way you put that. Yeah.
So I think that's the way to look at it. So a lot of people will get kind of hung up on like the offensive rebounding side a lot. Like that's probably the bigger like area when I've spoken to people about it or they've heard things. It's like, all right, like tell me about the offensive rebounding piece. It's like, all right, well, we weren't really concerned with that, right? Like we felt like we rebounded the ball pretty well offensively that year, but we wanted some clarity from a defensive standpoint. So the basic premise is that when a shot goes up from your team, you were essentially then guarding who was guarding you. So that's kind of the best way to initially describe it. So shot goes up, obviously that's usually a matchup, maybe there's been scrambles, whatever. Ultimately, someone's going to challenge a shot functionally, and then you're going to have someone that's directly in front of you. So that's kind of the initial premise.
Yeah, I definitely, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, offensive rebounds. Like that was where my mind went too when I first. So then I'm like watching more and listening more. I'm like, oh, it's not the real goal is the transition piece, the defensive piece, and the offensive rebounding is just kind of a byproduct of the transition of the philosophy, right? Essentially.
Yeah, and it's really about it. Like I think the way that I think about it, it's doing something in defensive transition that does then not compromise your offensive rebound, right? So some teams will have the philosophy, and it's that they're among some of the best in defensive transition. We'll have the philosophy of let's just send 5 people back, right? So that, yeah, absolutely, that helps you. And if you look at the kind of best teams defensive transition wise, often many of those people we're going to send 5 people back teams, right? And that's great. So you can absolutely go ahead and do that, but there's the counter argument that now you're not offensive rebounding the ball, and at some point there's some weighing up on what the benefit of that is. Right. So really, our kind of thought of it is that it's kind of the best of both worlds. So we get to do the defensive transition piece at a really, really high level. We get to build pressure. So we get to apply pressure. And that was something that our first year, I think, really kind of shocked some teams. And then we also get to offensive rebound the ball if we do this well as well. Like we're in the vicinity, we're around, we're there, we're doing this thing.
Right. But most people would think that when you send 5 to the glass, right, the initial thought is
you're vulnerable.
Wait, yeah, now you're vulnerable. Who's getting back? I know, like hearing that at first, I was like, but then yeah. So can you kind of explain and talk to that argument a little bit and why that's it's actually the opposite?
Yeah. So the first principle in terms of the kind of the nitty gritty of it is that every player wants to get to the high side of their play. So when we say the high side of that player, it's generally the side towards the middle of the floor. Okay, or if you're obviously in the corner, the high side would be towards the other side, like the other end of the rim.
Towards the half.
Yeah, so if you were to go to the underside, so that happens a lot in offensive rebounding contests, someone goes to the underside and then tries to get this offensive rebound. Well, now you're exposing a numbers situation going the other way if you don't get it. So just that premise of getting to the high side allows for every single person to be accounted for. And in theory, every single one of them has someone between them and the hoop. Okay, when the rebound, the defensive rebound eventually happens, a score eventually happens.
All right.
Now, because you're sending someone to each player, the person that defensive rebounds the ball always have someone in their vicinity. Okay. So there's always someone right next to them. Now, that may have been a contest, so they've had to kind of work to get that rebound a little bit more than they should have, or maybe we got there a smidge late, but they've got someone there, and now that outlet's a little bit challenged. Now they have to think about what they're doing. That first 0.5 we talk about a lot, first 0.5 seconds after they get that rebound. If we can be disruptive on that, then you're going to have numbers back, and you're going to be just fine.
Right.
So we're able to slow people. That person that's guarding the ball, they do a really good job. Obviously, that person's not now putting the ball on a deck and taking off. You've stopped that piece of someone starting transition, which is a really dynamic way to start an offensive transition possession. You've got rid of that. And so I think that's where you don't become vulnerable from the sending 5 people piece.
So when you are teaching the high side, I would assume too, is it when you're first teaching it at least, do players kind of run past their defender sometimes to go get, like, where do you guys teach, like, if you can go get the rebound, just go get the rebound versus staying on the high side and waiting? Do you find that players like initially are just tempted to kind of just go kind of run past as opposed to staying on the high side?
So we've had a couple of players. One of our players, Sarah Donovan, Canadian girl, was an elite offensive rebounder, really good feel for things. And she was probably the one that the first couple of weeks had the most trouble just trying to understand it a little bit. But like, I think that it's like, yes, that is an approach to maybe get a rebound individually. But like when we look about it as a system, so maybe some teams would be like, hey, we're sending 2 back, or we're doing that kind of thing. Well, that's like 3 people that then have a chance. And maybe you've got a slightly better than 50% chance for those 3 of getting the rebound. Maybe you're totaling 180%. Right. Okay. If you add 3 60s up. Okay. Well, like if we get 5 50-50 contests because we're now high side, we're equal with someone, we're in that space. Well, that's 250%. Right. So that we've kind of improved that as well. Now, as someone gets better feel for getting high side and then saying like, hey, you've ultimately got to go get the ball. There is a rebounding contest. This is how we scrum. This is how we battle. This is how we eventually get the ball. Then obviously your offensive rebound increases. And I think that some players get a better feel for that. I would say probably the part where some of the players that don't do it as well or early days is instead of getting high side, they'll just run to the back of someone. And then you're not creating a 50-50 contest at all. You're giving them a rebound. You're tagging up, but we're losing that offensive rebounding piece. And I think that's something that we got to continue to do better and kind of hold people a little bit more accountable to. Is not running to the back and actually like truly getting equal 50-50 with someone to create that contest.
So when
and the beauty about it too, right? So like we talked about kind of finding someone to kind of be scrumming with, to be 50-50 with, to be tagged to.
Yeah.
The beauty is well, what are you coached to do as a defensive rebounder?
Right.
Right? You're coached to go find that kid.
Yep.
Go box them out.
Yeah.
So they find each other. So it's like,
Right.
it's actually not that challenging. It's not like, oh, I got to figure out who I got to. Well,
He should be coming towards you. Right.
Yeah, like they're coming towards you. Like I've been told since they were 6 years old, go box that kid out. So there's and like I've had some people say, oh, well, like it's really hard to figure out who you tag to. Well, we don't say the same thing all that much on a defensive rebounding contest. We just say, yo, you got to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like you got to box that kid out. Like go do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing. Yeah.
So when your player, let's say you're 50-50, you're even with them, if she leaves and starts to leak out, you're going with her, you're forgetting the rebound.
Yep, you go.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So you go, and you do, like, obviously there is a period of like lag, maybe at some points where like that kid leaves and you're still around a little bit. And that's what that first 0.5 is about on the ball. So like, let's say kid's been in that rebounding contest a little bit, gets out of there. Well, if you do a terrible job on the ball, then hey, maybe that small little lag you got would open them up on the backside. But if you do a good enough job there with really the person on the basketball, then you're in kind of good shape.
All right. Did you ever find that? So I know with us, like when we have really quick guards who, you know, we sometimes, I think our initial like scout would be, let's get back, stop the ball at the 3-point line so we don't get blown by. How did you guys kind of teach? I know you had something called like the plug, right? Is where everyone else is kind of forcing the ball going to one direction to kind of avoid somebody just right. If your post player picks up the fastest point guard in the league, sometimes, right, even if she tries to guard and stay in front, it's almost impossible, right? So how did you kind of funnel in terms of stopping?
Yeah, so the biggest thing, and we've had a run and jump in the past where it's like you've got to kind of force sideline and then get them to turn back middle. Kind of the tagging up principle is the opposite of that. So you have to funnel everything towards the middle of the floor. You don't really have plugs and help to the outside, whereas you have plenty of help towards the middle of the floor plugging in different areas. So to me, the best way to think about it is really it's just like a full court pack line defense, right? So it's like a full court pack line defense. Like you're in a gap, you're in those spaces, you're taking up that area. You're obviously squishing as a group as they come down. But really, when that player has the ball, they should see like 5 bodies in front of them that there's no ability to do anything with. Now, if they kick it ahead, now, hey, we're plugging from that spot. And I actually had a visual, our first year, we were kind of trying to talk about kind of just the concept of plugging and really them seeing all 5 people in front of them. It was a great photo. I'll probably send it your way of Giannis.
I'll take that.
Of Giannis being guarded by the Celtics.
Okay.
And he was out the top of the key. They were like running a 5-out offense. And he just literally saw all 5 people. Like there wasn't anywhere to go. And I actually think we've done a really, really nice job of handling quick guards, provided we haven't let them go sideline, which has happened a couple of times. But for the most part, like we played, like Maryland was our first game of the year. They were running up scores on everyone all year. And we hadn't done a great job with our tagging up prep for that. But like our first half of that game, they had a lot of trouble. That's a really talented basketball team that I think they scored maybe 37 points in the first half of that game.
Yeah, they got the ball.
They were basically scoring 100 on everyone. And so, so I think that was good. Like we've had other teams that have, there's another example, SEC school we played last year, way more athleticism than us. They've kind of seen what we did on film a little bit in terms of not getting back in transition, not getting back in trans. And they thought that they were going to just run all over us. And our tagging up just stifled them completely in that phase of the game. And it got to the point they actually put in tagging up this year. So I've had a bunch of calls with them. They're friends of ours. They kind of tried it a bunch this year. I haven't spoken to them about how it's gone kind of late part of the year, but yeah, it was so effective against them. They're like, this is something we need to do.
Right. So I watched a few clips of you guys. I watched your 2019 and then this past season. And another thing I noticed too, which you mentioned in your clinic was if the rebound goes up, we're both high side 50-50. There's a lot of times when the ball is getting deflected and sent out of bounds and it's a dead ball, right? So can you kind of talk about, is that something you emphasize with the players? Like if you can't grab it, just tip it out kind of thing, or?
Yeah. So like really your goal is to like get a fingertip to the ball. So like if you can get a fingertip to the ball in a 50-50, then that's slowing defensive transition. Like no one's able to run from something where the ball spilled loose, someone's had to go chase it down. We've now got 5 people back. That's great. Obviously, dead balls are great situations where now we can set a defense. We could even change a defense at that point. We could get in a press. We could do whatever we need to do. So an offensive rebound is obviously the best thing that can happen, but really the second best thing that can happen in a tagging up situation is the ball being tipped out off us and it now being their ball from a baseline out of bounds going the other way. So yeah, we absolutely emphasize that.
Nice. So then when the ball crossed half court, right, you slowed it down. How soon is everyone trying to get back to their matchup? Is it just as soon as possible? Are you just game by game? Are you okay with the matchups not being the perfect matchups? Or how do you kind of emphasize the players getting back on the appropriate player or not?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit. And so this year, to kind of touch on this year a little bit, like our kind of best group that we would have had on the floor have a good amount of length and a pretty similar, mostly from kind of the 2 through 4 spot, especially. And the way our injuries played out, we ended up playing a lot smaller, I would say, and a lot bigger than we would have liked. Like we lost a lot of those kids through the middle section, which probably limited a little bit how effective we could have been in this stuff. Like I think you do need certain profile of a team to be able to do this. But really the objective is for you to guard who you're guarding until there's a logical time to switch.
Okay.
So it's not that you're really getting back, and maybe you've done a great job and it's been in trans and you're able to like kind of trade each other off when that's going on. But the most part, you're guarding who you're guarding until there's an action, until there's an opportunity for you then to trade off people. And like, I think where it becomes most challenging to do that is when the opponent is switching on the other end. So if an opponent is switching a 1-5 ball screen, right? Now you end up with your 5 on your 1 and your 1 on your 5. Those are scenarios that, down the other way, you need to have a little bit more urgency on what that looks like to trade each other off.
Did you feel like teams tried to take advantage of that, knowing that your matchups would be maybe a little bit skewed coming back?
So to be honest, like I think our first year of doing it, and I think some of that was it was new, and some of that was because we did have really similar players, like in terms of size across the board. Like it wasn't that evident that, hey, we have a small person guarding someone.
It wasn't like everyone in the gym was like mismatch. Like,
like we had a 5'6", 5'7" kid playing at the 2 spot this year, some of the year. It's like, okay, well, when that kid's on their 5, like it's pretty clear what's happened now. But that happens in normal transition too, right? Like that's
exactly. Yes.
Like if you're a lot of teams will send their little kid back. It's like, go get to the back of the ring. Oh,
right.
Shoot, here I am. That's that's what I'm dealing with. So I think the first year, I don't think people really knew what we were doing at all. I think this year they probably had a little bit better of a feel.
They've watched your clinic, that's why, right?
maybe that's what happens. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, but yeah. So this year, I think there were some examples where some teams were able to like hurt us a little bit for some choices that I think were twofold. Like some of it was like, hey, when you're playing 7 players, it's a pretty demanding way to play.
Yeah.
And the type of the 7 players we're playing was problematic, along with your practice time, right? Like I think that this is something that's really, really easy to do when you've had like enough baseline reps of doing it. So like, because it's just what you do every day then, right? It's not like you're doing a drill. It's like we never do a defensive transition drill. Right? Like there's never anything where we do a defensive transition drill because we know what we do defense. Like we don't have to figure it out. Like it's a system. We always do that. Any drill that's an offense drill is at the start a defensive transition drill too. It's a system of ending offense and starting defense. And so when you get those reps, it's fine. Now, when it's our 3 assistant coaches playing in the practice, like they're just not getting those reps that look anything like what it needs to look like. And so our ability to practice it this year was a problem. So I would say like there's a little bit of that. I think we can get better at kind of making people do one more thing. And I think we got better at that as the season went on, of switching at logical moments and those kind of things. So that's an area of emphasis as we move on to next year.
And I don't know how much evidence there is to say this either, but in my opinion, I feel like how many teams are actually really good at attacking like a switch in the post anyway? Like teams want to come up and run their normal sets, right? So it's almost like that's kind of taking them out of their flow. If they're going to stop their entire play or their entire transition offense to try and attack a switch, which they don't do often, probably. I mean, I'd like to see how successful that would be, in the first few seconds of the shot clock anyway. Like it could almost be a smart way to play it and make them.
Well, I agree. And I think there's an element of like, and we've obviously tried to switch and we've scrambled. It's like, how much do you just like, obviously equip the players to handle the situation? Be like, hey, if you're a little person, like let's make them do one more thing. And like, is that actually better than worrying about trying to find ways to like conveniently switch anyway? Because like we've absolutely had times, and I can think back many a time this year where our little person was the person guarding the 5 and it resulted in a turnover. They try to do too much. They try to throw the ball away and
And too, like I just thinking but like too, most teams end their short shot clock in some sort of ball screen anyway, right? Typically, I don't know. In our league, they do high ball screen, wing ball screen, middle ball screen, flat. Like if you already have that mismatch, right? 1-on-5, 5-on-1, a lot of teams don't even recognize. She's still going to go 5's still going to go set the ball screen. You just switch, and now you have your ideal matchup that you want.
Yeah, you're just back in your fast.
So that's, I mean, I think at some points it kind of could work to your favor in terms of throwing the other team off a little bit and kind of confusing them. I thought about it that way a little bit, but
yeah, and it'll be interesting. Like I think we're tracking right now to start like. I think our starting point guard next year she's gonna be one of our returners is kind of 5'10", and so like we're probably gonna play most of our groups that are 5'10" and up, and so like I think at that point we don't have like we haven't really recruited that way. We know how we want to play, and I think we're gonna have one kid under probably 5'9" this year on the roster, so that makes a big difference. Like obviously when you know the way you want to play the game, we're kind of at that point now where that's gonna kind of come to fruition a little bit.
Gotcha. Do you guys, what do you do off of a free throw? Just curious, like imagining, right, if we're shooting that position that you kind of wedge your defender on a free throw, is that kind of that 50-50, just trying to picture that?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So, and it's obviously like, you've got to find the, like there's usually one loose person that has to do their job well. And I think that the other part is like, you'll see a lot of teams and their kid, like while a free throw is going on, those two kids are like, freaking standing back somewhere, like just nowhere to be found kind of deal. So no, like you gotta be somewhere to be active and be involved in this thing right now. Like if you think about it, okay, let's say this free throw was to decide the game and you had to get an offensive rebound to get an extra possession to get this game to be a win. That's what it's got to look like. Like you gotta be up on the line, ready to go in this situation a little bit more. So that's something we probably need to practice a little more as well. But yeah, like that's pretty natural.
And then against the zone, it's similar. You're just finding the kid closest to you.
Yeah, and I think against the zone, it's a little trickier. It is in the same way that people talk about, hey, it's tougher for them to defensive rebound in a zone because they don't know who they're like. Sometimes it's not as clear, but we've had some kind of guidance for the kids that, hey, like if you're in these kind of areas, like as a rule of thumb, like you may not know who's guarding you right now. But like if you get towards the elbows, you'll probably find out pretty quickly.
Right.
So
and they're going to try to box, like we said earlier, right? The emphasis.
Yeah, they're going to try to box you out, and you're going to be able to generally find someone with that as well. So I think that's an area of growth. Like that's definitely a question we had originally with this. Is like, what do we do against the zone? And I think we were pretty good. It was actually, and to bring up LaSalle again, actually 2 years ago, late in the year. They zoned us a whole chunk in that game. And we ended up with, I think, upwards of 25 offensive rebounds in that game, all from little people being involved. All like, and it's like the little chase down things. It's just from being there. We were able to get a lot of those. Gotcha.
So shifting into kind of how you like implemented this within the team, I feel like that's right. The idea is great, like you said, but how did you guys kind of go about showing the team? Was it film first? Was it on the floor showing the entire thing? Was it the whole part, whatever? How did you guys kind of go about showing the team and introducing that concept?
Yeah, so we're kind of a little fortunate because we're able to get some access to some teams doing it from Australia that we're able to do. And we also had a couple of our players that had used that system before when they were down there.
Okay.
So we had 2 players that were at least familiar enough with it. They hadn't done a lot of it, but familiar enough. So that part was a little bit helpful as well. It was good. We were able to show girls doing it. Like that's not often the case. Like sometimes it might be, hey, we're trying to do something, and I've seen a men's team do it, and this is what we're doing. Like this was girls roughly their age. So that was really helpful.
Yeah.
So we showed some film on it, and then we kind of broke down, like really it's 3 principles, right? It's like your first movement has to be forward on a shot. So that's like your first movement. You're getting to the high side of whoever's guarding you.
Right.
And then you're battling that out. And then the follow-up is the plugging piece and how you guard the ball. So we kind of showed all that. We kind of put together a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. And our kids are nerds. They love that stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're dorks, but they love it. So we showed them some of that. And then we really just walked through on the floor kind of what 50-50 and what high side looks like from everywhere. So, hey, like if shot went out from here, where's high side? And then we drilled that a little bit of just like, hey, like if shot comes up from here, this is where we need to get to. Let's get to this. This would now be what that looks like. Did a little bit of scrumming from that. And then we did a lot of kind of 3v3, 4v4 kind of areas of like, hey, all right, shot's gone up. Maybe a shot's come from an advantage. Shot goes up. Here we are. Let's tag up and then let's plug and slow the ball. So,
can you talk about scrumming a little bit?
Yep.
Just like what that kind of entails? Is that just fighting for the rebound essentially?
Yeah. So kind of scrum, like, and we don't love the word, but we haven't really come up with a better word for it. But that's the word that Aaron's used with his group. And scrum is a rugby term,
yeah.
Right. So, and really it's a battle between 2 groups,
right?
A physical battle. And so really the scrumming piece is ideally side by side. So like you've got to the high side of someone, and now you're trying to move them in a direction away from where they want to go. Okay, so that's towards the side. So like if I'm getting high side and this is over here, my defender's here, well, I'm trying to move them in this direction to create more space in the high side area, okay, for that ball to go into.
Okay, so that's the area you want to create the space.
That's the area you want to create. Yep.
And that's how you avoid over the back fouls too, right? Because you're
because you're not going over the back, you're to the side of someone. So if you're coming from the baseline, right, like in theory, a scrum would be pushing someone out under the hoop.
Right.
So that would be pushing them out under the hoop. Well, a rebound's not going out like out of bounds that way. It's going towards the middle of the floor. So that's kind of the concept of like, hey, where most rebounds go, that's where we are as a collective 5 people.
Gotcha. So you would do just one-on-one, like literally.
Yeah, we did some one-on-one, just kind of like, a little bit of kind of fighting in that realm. And then
that got pretty competitive or what?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, like we got a couple of kids that like to play pretty physically, and like the several of our Australian kids have played Australian rules football in their life, and so they like hitting people, and so it kind of comes pretty naturally to some of them, and a couple of our American kids are pretty tough physical players too. So so they like that stuff. We didn't do much of it. Like I think they got the point for the most part with that.
Yeah.
It was then, how do you address the plugging and those kind of things? And so when we rep the plugging piece, really our goal for that is that we want to slow the ball enough that the ball is the last thing to cross halfway. So that's kind of the goal, right? Like if you can be there where you've got five plugs, you're here, you've got someone guarding the ball, and the ball is the last thing that crosses halfway. That's our goal. And we kind of had some fun with it our first year. Like it was very different, obviously, and it was kind of funny because teams would they would think we're pressing, and like I wouldn't call what that is pressing, right? Like we're not trying to steal the ball from you. Like we're not like we're just trying to slow you down.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would bring like so many people back into the backcourt.
So that everyone
out and stuff. We're not trying to steal the ball. Like we're literally just like squishing. Like as you go, like this is on you. And we had some teams. There were a couple of teams that year. I won't name names, but there was one team that year that had a point guard that super athlete, like unbelievable athlete, who like she ended up taking like 35 dribbles on like 3 or 4 possessions to start the possession,
right?
Because she was so uncomfortable with like getting to where she wanted to get to and what that would look like, and being able to get an offense from there. Our first game actually was that we put it in. We played Georgetown.
Okay.
First regular season game that year, so no one had seen it. and their point guard actually like tapped out in the fourth quarter, like couldn't go anymore, like was cramping and like couldn't deal with it, like in that game, and that was fine. Like we were kind of in a spot, we'd be good, and we like blew that team out, and we're like, okay, like we got something here, like this is kind of what it looks like.
So when the players, right, they feel the success.
Oh yeah, they feel you all the time.
The buy-in. Can you talk about that and how, like, if players don't buy in, like it's not going to work, right? Realistically, how did you kind of, from the first season maybe to now that you're doing it, how have you kind of been able to get the players to buy in sooner? Whether it's the way you're teaching, or is it ultimately just that success from doing it early on that they feel like, oh, this works?
Yeah, so the unique thing, we didn't really have a single freshman play this past year for us. We only had one come in, and she tore her ACL before the season started. So everyone this last year had done it before. I do think that there's still a couple of players that just didn't fully like understand it, and that they're great. Like I think they've moved on to a point where, like, once again, it was very different.
Yes.
And it's hard. Like there's some elements to that too. And it's hard when you got 7 players. Like it's hard to do that over and over. And I think at times they didn't see the success out of it enough.
Right.
I think that's the thing. Like if you get to, and going 5-on-5 against it, I think if you're on the receiving end of it, I think you pretty quickly buy into this being something you should be doing. Right. Like if you're the point guard and you get that ball and you're used to just taking up the court and doing your own thing, and there's someone right there with you, there's plugs, you're getting like, you're feeling them that whole time. I think there's buy-in pretty quickly with that piece.
Yeah.
And I think the other part is like just reminding them of what the alternative is, right? So like as much as there's a like difficulty, there's a toughness that you have to those rebounding contests, and attention to detail to make sure you're finding your tag every time, your first foot forward, all those kind of things. The alternative is that you're sprinting your ass back, and now you're scrambling. You don't know who you got. Now we're freaking pointing this way. We're doing this or that. We have to communicate crazily. We have to do all these things. Like, hey, like, do you want to do that instead? Well, like, I think this is a better option for you.
Right.
So,
and the ball, right? And when you get back in transition D, like, right, so coaches, we're all like, and I'm guilty of it too, like, get back, get set, right? And now I'm standing there, and I'm standing and I'm waiting, and now I'm picking up the ball that's coming full speed at me. How am I stopping that ball, right? There's no momentum. It's,
I think that's part of it. And to me, I think a lack of preparation this year, in terms of like any form of preseason where we were able to have multiple players on the court in the same workout, combined with lack of numbers, kind of limited our ability to really kind of like do that. Like I think we'll have at least 12 people I think we can play this year, like legitimately, that we can cycle through and come in waves. And like if you're throwing these people out and they're just grinding teams down that way, and we can press, like we can add, like once again, you're up there, you can run and jump, you can do a range of different things from being up there. Like I think that probably next year is going to be the litmus test on how effective the system is going to be for us.
Right. And maybe not this year, but maybe last year, how did you kind of keep players accountable to this? Did you stat anything in practice or through games, like attempted, to get they got on the high side, check mark, right? Or was there any way that you kind of held players accountable, or were able to kind of see who was kind of doing it more so than others, other than just your eyes watching?
Yeah, so in the moment, we didn't do much of that. In their like post-game film, a few times as a whole group would show, hey, this is a good tag up, this is a bad tag up, this is where it didn't really go well. Hey, here's some individuals that just aren't tagging up as much as they should, whatever that piece looks like. And then I think that there were some moments, some different games where like, hey, we didn't do a good job of this. Like, all right, let's stat this game and count how many people did a good job.
Gotcha.
Right? Like how many people actually did like tagged up.
Right.
And to me, if you get 3 of the 5 do a good job, as long as one of those people is the one that ends up on the ball, you're generally not getting scored on.
Right. Gotcha.
That's been kind of, now obviously most of the time you get 4 and 5 out of 5, hopefully at least get to the point. And I think some of the holding them accountable piece is this next year or two really challenging them to be a little bit more physical in the offensive rebounding side of that equation.
Gotcha.
So I think, and some of it was like, as I said, we had a couple of really talented players that didn't play this year that have a good amount of athleticism, a good feel for offensive rebounding the ball, two of which were top 5 rebounders in the respective previous years playing in our conference that didn't play this year. And so I think some numbers are impacted by that. But yeah, I think that's where we need a little bit more accountability as we move forward with this too. It's like, hey, let's really, like, we're doing this for a reason. Let's put some pressure that way too.
Would you say that this is kind of part of your identity now? Like, you know, at Davidson, like you're known, like you guys are going to stick with this, you think, for the long run here?
I think so. Like, I think what it does, we're not going to be the most athletic team in our conference. Like that, there's just no chance that's ever going to happen. And I think it's a really nice way for us to neutralize some of that speed and quickness that other teams have.
Yep.
But I do think we're a team that over the coming years has the potential to have a good amount of depth. That we can do stuff like that pretty well. We're not somewhere that takes transfers and has like kids don't transfer from Davidson. Right. We don't have we just don't have like transition in our program like that. And so you can build an identity with a group that lasts a long time, that there's this knowledge throughout the group on what this feels like, what this looks like. And to me, that goes to the offensive side of the ball to us as well. Like how we want to play, that's what it looks like. We don't really run sets. Everything's very conceptual that we do. Team plays can grow in that system and get better as it goes really well. So I do think that that's something. There's a grittiness to it as well. There's just I think that matches how we want to be as a program.
Right. And then obviously, right, like you're probably going to try and recruit to that. Like if you want to do, right, you want to be a team that tags up, it's important to be able to recruit to that system too, right? As much as you want to adapt to your personnel, you guys think that that's probably a smart route too, in terms of we want we want that physicality piece to it as well? Or do you think it's something that can more so be taught?
I think it's a bit of both, right? Like I think that we're probably in the mold that we have prioritized recruiting the offensive side of the ball. I think we've recruited a lot of length too, and length and shooting. And I think that we are going to be like potentially exposed from an individual defense standpoint at times, right? We're not like,
you can't have it all though, right?
Like you can't have it all, right? And so like, to me, the tagging up version, like that's something where as a collective group, we can slow teams down. We can take the transition side, like phase out of the game. Right. Obviously, that's the most effective offensive segment of basketball, most efficient side. Yeah. And then with us having people start their offense much later in the shot clock, we'll have less time to start to pick apart players when you're starting offense at 15 seconds on the shot clock, because it's taking you 10 seconds to advance the ball and 5 to figure out where you want to be. Right. So, like, I think that's a little bit of it as well. Yeah. I do think probably the size element of not having too many small guards. Yeah. Is the one that we'll probably be kind of most focused on, just like being wary of.
Because in a perfect world, right, you could switch 1 through 5. Doesn't matter who you have in transition, and now you're safe.
And I think, and we're not going to be a program like there's just not that many good bigs out there, right? So like, where are you finding? We've got a great one right now in Australian good Adelaide Fuller that's kind of 6'3" and probably different to the others, but that's probably going to be an anomaly. Like there's just not that many floating around, and so the thought that we're going to be playing a decently mobile 6'1", 6'2" kid at the 5 spot is pretty realistic. But that's something that can be, and it fits our offense as well. And so I think that from a recruiting standpoint, that's something that will be what we'll be looking at moving forward.
Yeah. Now, this has been awesome. I want to get into a quick little segment that I end off all the podcasts with. You didn't have any of these questions beforehand coming up, but a quick hitter segment. So first one, nice and easy. Favorite city to recruit in? As you know, I'm in my first year. I'm going to be recruiting for the first time this summer. I know you said you recruit a little bit. Obviously, you go back to Australia, back over to Europe, but favorite city, regardless, could be America, international, wherever.
Yeah, I love to be at the Australian National Championships. I really like those, and it's just the vibe's cool. Like you're not having to go from court to court. Like there's 2 courts usually at those things. Okay. I like the food. They're normally in good spots. good friends. I like that piece.
Yep.
Um,
Give me an American one. What American city?
I haven't done a whole lot of them. Like, to
Okay.
be honest, like I think out of all the ones I've done, I probably like Atlanta.
Okay.
I think that obviously that's like usually second half of July is the whole chunk in Atlanta.
Right.
That one I don't mind. So
Okay. All right. Next one. Thoughts on the 3-point line moving back? I know that's been like the huge controversy of the men's line. So I don't know about your team, but we found that our players, I think we tracked it in the beginning of the season, like over half of their shots were being taken from the men's line anyway. But we were like, get up to the line. Like they wouldn't. It was like just the mental, because our line is lighter and then the men's line was darker. I don't know if it was the illusion of that, but what are your thoughts on the just moving the 3-point line back and making it just consistent?
I think my general philosophy on all that stuff,
Mhm.
like this world game. So like this is a world game. We're preparing people like to
Right.
play overseas, to do all these things, like preparing teams to play in the Olympics and
Yep.
whatnot and those kind of things. And to me, I think having a universal rule system across what basketball is probably my preference.
Right.
And obviously, the men's line is the FIBA line,
Yep.
and so that's any kid that we've recruited internationally. That's
He's
what they're
already-
shooting on normally.
I
Any
guess
kid
you're a little
that,
biased with this question. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think that like that's my preference, and I
Yeah.
honestly don't care where the line is.
Right.
I just think that uniformity throughout all of basketball, and I don't really care whether the NBA wants to have a longer line or whatever. That's their own thing. But I think like FIBA World Championships, all that kind of thing. Like I think having a uniform line is probably the way to go.
Gotcha. All right, moving to the defensive side of the ball here. Favorite way to guard, a side pick and roll, wing ball screen, whatever you want to call it. Ice, hedge, or to go under?
Ooh, out of those three.
Ice, yeah, you can put them in order. Put them in order. What would be your go-to? Let's assume we have an average shooter, right? Average shooter can knock down a 3, but you'll dare or 2 maybe. Ice, hedge, go under.
I think my default on that would be to go under.
Okay.
I think with the one thing I've noticed a little bit is like teams are getting better at kind of rolling those kids in a little bit, and I don't think the officials are calling that super well. Like I think
When
that's
you
a really
mean
tough
like
thing.
the post rolling on top
Yeah,
of
like post rolling on top of that kid going under. Like that's something that at times I saw a lot this year that I was just like, that's not allowed. But
Right.
I think referees had a lot of trouble figuring that piece out.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Have you guys done any icing at all, or
We've done a little. So yeah, so we iced one side of the floor this year.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay.
And we've hedged in the past. Like I think that, yeah, really, like I would put both of those at 2A and 2B.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, for me too. Like, I mean, going under, you kind of keep it a 2-man game for the most part. You don't have to bring any other help and whatnot too. And
yeah, I think the one thing with the going under piece and like we went under a decent chunk this year as well. And
yeah,
like to me, the biggest thing, you watch it in film and you're like, okay, like this team tried to go under, but they got like diced up, and like
right.
guarding the ball piece initially is something that's really important. Like if you're guarding the ball, then your under is at a different spot. Like they're having to come get you,
Right.
you're able to slide under and get to that spot. And I think that's something that's maybe missed, like often not taught well enough,
Yeah.
or not understood well enough. Is that like if you want to do that, like you actually have to guard people. Like, you think you're just gonna like slide under and some of that comes because you watch the NCAA tournament and you see some of these teams that like at the ACC level or whatever, that like these kids just can't shoot the ball at all.
True. I know.
And like they're just
so
guarding from freaking like the logo. But I don't think you can do. I don't think that's a smart way to go.
For our team too, I found that, and also like just me coaching, obviously I want to get better at just like the sense of urgency to get under too. Like I feel like sometimes, we say go under and they just kind of go under slow. And then if you're smart on the offensive end, right, just attack it hard. You're going to beat her to the spot. And I was like, you got to get back square. Like I feel like we'd be almost lagging to get underneath the screen and kind of cut at the hip and forced to open up instead of getting under and getting back to square. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's about being like evasive too. Like you got to be a little bit evasive and like, and understand that like, once again, these are 5 people actions. So there's someone buying you some time in certain elements, and there's certain things that are much harder for people to buy you time with. And
That's hard.
yeah, like I think
too, shooting from behind this, like that's a tough shot.
Oh yeah, like it just like people don't do it. Like I think we actually started at one point this year, and it's like, all right, like these kids, even though they're great shooters, like they've hit 2 of them on the year.
Right.
Like,
right.
Behind a ball screen. Like that's just not easy. And like particularly if it's in transition, right? Someone's coming down in trains and it's an early ball screen, and like how many coaches are pretty good with a kid shooting a semi-contested pull-up from the 3-point line of someone going on the ball screen at 23 on the shot clock.
Right.
You're kind of daring their will a little bit.
Gotcha. Yeah. Last one I got for you. Overrated or underrated one-on-one drills in practice? What are your thoughts on one-on-one drills?
Underrated.
Okay.
With a caveat.
Yeah.
That those drills have some form of constraints involved.
Okay. Give me an example of maybe one.
So like whether it's like I think one-on-one from slight advantages are really good.
Yeah.
I think one-on-one with constraints over areas, constraints over number of dribbles you can take.
Yeah.
Like I think all those things very underrated.
Yeah.
I think just like handing a ball to someone and saying go play.
Right.
I don't think it's deliberate enough.
Yeah.
Like I think there's particularly with the way we play, like we don't want to encourage that. Like if you're neutral and someone's guiding you 1v1, well, let's get something that creates you an advantage some other way.
Yeah.
And so I think the way we play, it's probably not how we would do things.
Yeah. Do you guys do a ton of 3-on-3 just like because of the FIBA, like just from you bringing over the FIBA stuff a little bit? Or
yeah, like we'll do. I would say we'll do a lot of like 4v4 advantage stuff, like when we're layering together, like receiver spot type things, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In our postseason, especially, we focus a lot on the 3-on-3 piece.
Yeah.
So we play twice a week. We play the FIBA games.
They must love that, the kids, right?
Yeah, they love it, and part of it too. Like when you got these international kids, so we'll have 5 internationals on our team next year and that kind of thing. But like that's a legitimate form of basketball now.
Right.
It's gonna be in the Olympics,
yeah.
Right? Like that's actually gonna be in the Olympics come July this year. That 3-on-3 basketball is a thing, and so
awesome,
that's a viable pathway for these kids to be playing and making money, right? Like there's really good money in the 3v3 or a 3x3 basketball, and so exposing them to some of that. We're actually our camps this year, we've done some of it in the past in our camps, but our camps this year will have a layer of that too this year where for our team camp we'll be playing some 3x3 and that kind of stuff too. It's great for conditioning.
It's that idea from you,
yeah, it's just fun. Like, and unfortunately the last couple of weeks it's had to be coaches versus players, so we've had to get out there and do that. But the kids love it, and one of our players actually played in the Youth Olympics. 3-on-3 the year before she came to us, and I think it's just a fun way to play.
Nice. All right, to wrap things up, my final question for you again, Coach. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and kind of educate me a little bit more on this. I do appreciate it. My last question for you would be, in terms of a staff trying to implement a new concept, something that they've never taught before, right? A brand new idea. There's probably a little bit of that hesitation of, what if they don't buy in, or the questions, or just not feeling totally confident in terms of what you're teaching. What kind of advice would you give to a staff that's trying to implement the new idea? Maybe it doesn't go well right away, to kind of hang on and to keep staying consistent with it, as opposed to just tossing it out the window right away the first time it doesn't look great.
Yeah, I think it's like, and part of it is like practice is meant to be like messy, right? Like there's meant to be an element of it. Otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But I think there's probably 2 elements to it, right? Like there's certain things you're going to try that are less consequential, that are like, hey, like let's try this read in this action or whatever. Some of that kind of stuff is just like feel and play and kind of work through it. Maybe it's just like, yeah, you know what, I was wrong on that. Like let's kind of do it this way.
And that's almost right. Sorry to interrupt you. That's almost part of it. Like as a coach, sometimes it's hard to be like, ooh, like I was wrong, or like to be afraid of it not being right? Like, or not looking great.
Yeah, and I think that's part of like, there's an element where we expect that out of our players, right? So we expect our players to be able to communicate that way, like, hey, that was my bad on this one. Like, I got to be here and be that. Like, if that's not being modeled for them in some way, like if we think everything we say and do is the perfect thing, like I don't know how you expect your players to be able to communicate in a way that's like helpful. It's like, you know what, like I saw it differently there, but like, let's do it this way. So I think there's little things where it's like that. I think for something big, like, hey, this is the offense we're going to run. This is the offensive system. This is, hey, this is how we're going to play defense. This is tagging up. Like, I think you got to put a lot of time into thinking through and communicating as a staff what that looks like. How are we going to do it? What are the questions going to be? And then, like, I think we spent a lot of time in our conference room is a really vibrant area for us as a coaching staff. We spend a lot of time in there. Like, my head coach, Gail, never really even goes into her office. She just sits in a conference room, which is on the way to our offices. And that's just kind of a melting pot of where we spend a lot of our time. But I think talking through that stuff as a group, getting down on court, working through it. If you have the opportunity, try it on some people. So maybe it's a concept that you can try in a couple of individual workouts or a small group, or if you got a scout team that you're like, hey, let's try to teach this to the scout team and see how this goes. Maybe it's, hey, you don't have a summer session, you got some camp kids you want to try some things on. Hey, let's try this drill. Let's see how that goes. I think that's the way to do it, so that you get some of those kicks out, you get some of those answers. But to me, the biggest thing is being able to answer why, right? So like, if you can answer your why, then that's the thing. So like, if a kid goes, well, I don't get the high side thing. I don't get that piece. Like, this is different to what I normally do. Well, if you can't communicate your why, that, hey, this is a system to end offense, start defense, to take all of the gray out of everything we do from a defensive transition standpoint. It's going to allow us to put pressure on the ball, and it's going to not kind of take away from our offensive rebounding. If you're succinct like that, then they're like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I get that. Okay, and any rebuttal to that, it's like, okay, well, like, we've thought about that, right? Like, we've thought about that, and yes, you're right, but we think this is the way that this needs to happen for these reasons. So I think that there's obviously those discussions that have to be had. I think talking to some outsiders too, in terms of, hey, like, all right, so like, we're teaching you this, what would you say? Like, what would your first reaction to be? And I think all of your questions today were fantastic questions in terms of, yeah, like, those are things you have to think about, right? Like, all right, well, what are the consequences? What are some of the trade-offs? Those are things that are real in a game of basketball. So I think that's probably my advice, is like, make sure everyone is on the same page, everyone understands it. We're a staff that we feel like everyone has to be able to do everything. So it's not like we've got a coach that's just recruiting, that's just doing that. Like, you got to be able to coach everyone. If you can't coach everyone, that just doesn't play out. And so we spend a lot of time, if not 40% of our week, spending time together, getting on the same page with everything we do.
Yeah, Coach, that was well said. Again, I'm excited to hopefully connect on the road. I know you might not be, in America this summer.
I'll be here this year.
You're staying? Okay.
No one's letting us out of the country right now.
I wasn't sure if you're going back. So I'm excited to hopefully connect, and this has been awesome. I've learned a ton. So I, again, appreciate you. We will be in touch soon for sure. Thank you, Coach.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.